So I'm Sarah Brumfield.
And I'm Ben.
Here with Ben. And together we run From the Page, which is a crowdsourcing platform that libraries, archives, museums, historians use for transcription, but also indexing, photo identification, metadata creation, OCR correction, a lot of things around text and creating text and metadata for resources held at libraries and special collections and archives. One of the things that we've really been looking into in the last 6 months or so is all these emerging large language models, including ChatGPT, and thinking about how we could use them with the transcriptions that come out of From the Page and the metadata that is around the projects that we host, and just thinking about strategies and how this can fit into kind of the problems that we try to solve on accessibility, on findability, on just being able to use resources better. So we're really excited that you're here with us today, and let's go to the next slide. What we're going to talk about, we're going to start out with prompt writing strategies. So what we've learned trying to build our skills and doing a lot of research and learning from a lot of other resources on how to write prompts for ChatGPT. We're going to deep dive into some library and archives use cases that we've been experimenting with. And then we'll have questions and discussion at the end. So we definitely want to hear from you on what you're thinking about doing and what problems you're trying to solve that you think some of this might be able to help you solve. So let's go ahead and get started. We are recording this, and we will send it out in the next day or two to everyone who signed up. So when we talk about writing prompts, the word people are using is prompt engineering. And I like to think of it as how you steer the ship. So a prompt is just what you type into ChatGPT. The goal is to guide the AI by giving it clear instructions. The better your prompts are, the better your results are. They're more relevant, they're higher quality, they're more accurate, and fundamentally, they're more useful. The key to everything that we're actually going to talk about is context, context, context. The more context you provide, the more relevant, accurate, personal results you'll get. A lot of times what I see with people who are just starting to learn to use ChatGPT is you'll type one sentence, it'll be a question. And if you can even just spend a couple minutes brainstorming what you want the answer to include, or if you can find some information that you've already done some research and you're like, okay, I know this and I have this story and I'd like to create, write this thing or have this discussion or solve this problem. But the more you can bring to the prompt, the better the results will be. ChatGPT has the word chat in it. It's a dialogue. When we talk about setting up prompts with a lot of context, part of that context is actually the questions you asked before the current question. So you can start out by presenting some information, asking a question, giving a task, and then you can refine it by going back and forth with the large language model and the ChatGPT interface. So you can follow up with more questions. You can refine the answers to get better answers. You can clarify what results you were actually looking for that didn't quite get good. And so learning to iterate and iterate and iterate as you go through this is part of how you get better at building prompts. It's also how you get to the types of results you're looking for. I think a lot of us have used search engines for so long. That's how our brains have started to think. And, search engines, you type in a term or a question and you get a list of results that you kind of have to come through. That's not how this works. I'm actually finding it takes a different way of thinking about things. And I've started finding myself typing these types of prompts into Google. So there are different models and they work differently for these different technologies. So this piece of advice, give a specific role, is one of the most powerful pieces of prompting that you can give to ChatGPT. When we have started experimenting with things, you'll get one set of results out, and if you can then tell the AI that you are, for it to pretend to be an expert in the type of the type that you're trying to get the results from, like you are a historian analyzing the transcription of a primary source document, or you're a software developer, you're a digital librarian, you're a metadata librarian, you're an archivist. Any of those will narrow down the focus, and it will help the model access the most relevant information. This one, super, super, super powerful. Try it yourself. If you've messed around a little bit with ChatGPT and not been very pleased with the results, get it to put on a hat of a very specific expert and see how it becomes a different sort of response. I think this, which is persona, is kind of just an extension of what I was talking about earlier, but really this is how you get more personality, more style in the responses that you get back. You can ask for it to pretend to be a historian, but you can also start giving it like a resume and a background of what type of historian are you? Where did you go to school? What do you specialize in? Who are you talking to? Are you teaching a class? Are you all of these things? Give it enough more and more context, because that's how you get great results, is lots of context. That more context gives you a lot more personalized results, more style, more tone. You'll see this third example here in the style of famous person. So some of the early articles I at least read on ChatGPT was, in the style of Shakespeare, right? And it can produce text that sounds very much like something Shakespeare would have written. But I think for our professional purposes, it gets interesting if you ask it to write, in the style of, Oprah Winfrey, if you're interviewing someone and you want to have a lot of compassion and empathy and curiosity, or Bill Gates, if you want to be someone, want it to speak as someone who is a technical expert who considers humanity and the impacts of technology on humanity. So there's lots of different ideas that you can use here. When you're working on problem solving, especially kind of technical problem solving, math problems, my daughter and her friends during the school year were using this to help teach themselves statistics, and the prompts that you can bring to the table that help those really complicated problems, and you're usually at this point you're asking for it to be explained, but let's talk about this in a step-by-step, that's really the key word, way, or let's think step-by-step about a particular problem. So that's kind of another prompt idea to use when you have something that kind of needs to have steps. Let's go to the next slide. One of the things, the first problem I solved with ChatGPT that I had not been able to solve any other way is this one you see on the screen. So a couple months before we really started playing with ChatGPT, we had a digital librarian who was uploading some material from the page, and about a third of the page images were showing up pink on Firefox. And I'm a software engineer. I have a couple decades of experience. I'm very good at troubleshooting. I could not figure out why this was happening. We eventually solved the problem by having her compress them in a slightly different way, but we really didn't understand why that fixed the problem. So I asked ChatGPT, and this is a pretty short prompt, but if you look at it, think about the context that's going on here. Images, compressed, the name of the library that we used, Image Magic, and then kind of the symptoms, turned pink on Firefox. And then this question, any ideas why? It sort of is an open-ended question that suggests that I'm looking for more than one idea, which I think is one of the key points here, is because ChatGPT will give you what you ask for. So I asked for multiple ideas, and that'll come back in some of the other examples I give as we go along. The first one here, color profile mismatch. I had never thought about, and I'm like, yeah, that's kind of amazing because this is a new possible solution for me. And I kept the dialogue going by asking how I would actually keep the original color profile. What I ended up doing was emailing the digital librarian who was uploading these images and asking which color profile they were using. And they said, well, this one, but I could try it with this other one. I'm like, yeah, try that. Let's see what happens. And it solved the problem. So this was where it was like magic to me. So if you can specify a clear task or objective, then you're more likely to get that out of your interaction. You can specify things like response format, the length, the tone. So here's some examples of how I've used that and kind of examples I've also seen and tried. So summarize the following. That's kind of a standard thing that ChatGPT is very good at doing a summary. Draft an email, write a newsletter, create a table of options and their pros and cons. This one's a fun one because it actually lays out data in columns and rows. 3 bullet points. I like both this one and the table one because it forces the response to be more concise. ChatGPT tends to be wordy. So things that you can do that kind of tighten it up a little bit. You can also, I have some, I think an example later where I talk about like 200 to 400 words. So you're saying, here's the limit. Please be more concise. In plain English, or in words a 5-year-old can understand, or for a high school student, will influence how it responds to you and the types of language it chooses to use and how it presents concepts. So this example I have here, I was doing some health research and I found this paper at the National Institutes of Health in the US. I mean, it's written for medical researchers, right? So I pulled this paragraph that I thought was related to what I was trying to figure out, and I asked it to put it in plain English, which it did, and it was still over my head. So I was able to then kind of continue the dialogue, and it goes on for quite a while, trying to understand the content of this very jargon-rich paper I was reading. ChatGPT will mimic your style. If the level of formality that you use, the technical language that you put in your prompt, it will reuse the same style of technical language. Grammar, I've never seen it use bad grammar, but then I always write kind of formally when I'm talking to ChatGPT. And you can steer and iterate that style by having a dialogue. So you get one version, but maybe you ask for it to be more informal, or rewrite this to be more positive. I've actually done that with emails. I'm an engineer. I'm very direct and to the point. I'm like, can you help me rewrite this so it comes across more pleasantly than what was actually, just the facts, without being stereotypical, or even things like use alliteration. So here's an example next, where we took, and if you attended my ChatGPT webinar a month or 2 ago, this is an example I used there, but we had this interview Ben had done about scholarly editions and transcription, and it was lots of run-on sentences because it was just a transcription of someone talking, but it had some really cool ideas in it. So I asked ChatGPT to rewrite this as a newsletter instead of as an interview. Click. And this is what it produced. So a lot more structured data, paragraphs. It's the same ideas, the same thoughts that we brought in as the context for what we were looking for. It's a little bit stilted, right? I don't like this in conclusion. Thank you for reading. Today we're discussing, like, those are not quite how we would talk about things. So I asked it to make it more informal, please. And it kind of went in the opposite direction. We got a hey there and thanks for listening, catch you later, a lot shorter. But between these versions, we were able to then take what it produced and do our own editing to bring more of our voice back into what we wanted to actually send out. But it got us started, and it really did a good job on the structuring the text. I think one of the other really interesting ways that people are using, and I'm experimenting with using ChatGPT, is dialogue. So this is part of iterating, right? But if you use phrases like think out loud, or debate, or discuss, or reflect, then you can get a different style of interaction and a different way of looking at concepts and terms. I like it for coaching, and also kind of what I would call mild therapy. So because these large language models have been trained on, years and years of the open web, there's tons of information about health, about parenting, about careers, and you can ask it to help coach you through, making some nutrition choices, or getting your kid to sleep through the night, or how to ask for a raise, or things like that. The example on the right was I was experimenting with this idea of using ChatGPT for therapeutic reasons. I was like, I'm kind of feeling down. The customer who would like downgraded, and this is a normal sort of thing. And the answer was the same sort of things that a good friend would tell you, which is like, this is just how business works. You're going to be okay. Maybe you should go talk to the customer and understand why they made this decision, those sorts of things. But because it's a machine, I'm more willing to be vulnerable. I'm not wasting any of my friends or family's time. And I'm still getting that reflection. And I find it fascinating that we can be reflective with a machine. So I think that's some other ideas and venues to explore. One of the things that these large language models do is they lie. The technical term that people use is hallucinate, but it really annoys me to say that, because I'm like, you can hallucinate, but if you tell it to me like it's truth, then you're lying, right? So one of the things I encourage you to do, and have some examples here, is structure your prompts that help the responses not include hallucinations. So that, prompts that say, don't answer if you don't know. So one of the projects I'm working on is a chat bot based on transcribed archival text. And I've added this to the bottom of the prompt, which is, if the answer cannot be determined or inferred from the page text, please respond, I am sorry, I do not know. And it is actually really good at doing that. Like, it will tell me if I'm asking for something that is not in the historic text that I'm passing it.
Which is far better than what it would have done before, which is make something up.
Right. Only choose from the following list of tags. Ben's going to talk about that in a couple more slides, but here's your limit. Only choose from this. I also find if you ask for like 3 tags, it will give you 3 tags, whether it's right or not. So using a prompt like one or more of is a way to kind of give it more flexibility, so it doesn't, it's so literal that it won't, it doesn't feel locked into forcing itself to come up with 3 things. And then I mentioned this earlier, but asking for kind of word limits, summarize this article in 200 to 300 words. So let's break down an example. I've got a couple of examples here. This first one is kind of, the sort of thing that people on the web are talking about, right? And so you have the role, which is in blue, acting as a registered dietitian, a persona. So it's not just that you're a registered dietitian, but you have a passion for fitness. Context, so using the information I provided probably earlier in this interaction, for 50-year-old male, diabetes, intermittent fasting, no allergies, non-dairy, low sugar, all of that is context. And then in the green is the output specification, so a meal plan in grid form using inspirational tone. So all of those pieces together help you build a good prompt that actually gives you the type of response that you're looking for. So let's do an archival example. So this one is actually from this chatbot that I'm working on. So the role is, you're a historian analyzing the transcription of a primary source document. I kind of pull the persona bit in later where I ask, please answer pleasantly and accurately. The context is, this is a diary by this particular person in this particular place in this particular set of years. And then you'll be provided with a page of text from the diary. The question will be provided under the questions section. And this is actually an interesting structure that you can do too. If you find yourself using the same types of prompts over and over again, you can basically do substitutions. The square brackets around text and questions, and then you can drop in at the end text, the text you want it to use, question, the question you want it to answer. And you can do that with any word, right? It doesn't have to be text and question. But that's context, context, context. In fact, in this case, when we do this, the text is, a page of handwritten, what was previously handwritten text, and the question is whatever we're trying to answer from it. One of the other really interesting potential uses for the sort of text that we work with is extracting entities. So there's an example here. So there's a historical diary entry. This is the same diary that the previous slide talked about. And I said, hey, can you identify the people named in these entries? And it does. It actually is very accurate at pulling the people out of this transcription. And it actually talks about what the people do in the diary entry, which I didn't actually want. So I'm like, just their names. All I want is their names. But you can see how this has the potential to, be used in maybe if you had more formal documents, finding aids, or I think it suggests possibilities. I don't think we're quite there yet, but I think there's a lot of potential. Go to the next slide. Same sort of question, but places. What are the places mentioned in the diary entries? Same sort of answer. And then one of the things these models are extremely good at are classification. This has been going on for decades, where you ask a computer vision model, for instance, is this a bicycle or not? And you can train it, and it's actually really good at answering those style of questions. So I was like, okay, are there enslaved people mentioned in these entries? I happen to know there are, but I want to know what it thinks. And it's like, yes, there is Negro man Isaacs, and who passed away, and there's a coffin being made for him. But especially in the US, there's a lot of interest in trying to find and surface stories of people who aren't well documented in the public record. And so being able to, check a whole bunch of pages and answer this question, so what you might want to go look at, because it might have interesting stories in it that you haven't ever seen before. That I think is going to be a really interesting application of this type of technology. Ben has some more classification examples that are a little bit more sophisticated.
Yeah, so I'm going to walk through a couple of experiments that we ran on applying ChatGPT to primary source collections and the kinds of problems that cultural heritage institutions run into. So just a couple of deep dives on a couple of case studies. So one of the things that is an issue for us running a platform that hosts primary source collections from multiple different institutions is surfacing those to users across institutions, since every institution uses very different language to describe their own holdings. And oftentimes they will, if they are an institution that's focusing on the American South, they will describe each one of their collections in ways that differentiate themselves from each other, but not from, say, a natural history collection from Australia. They are not going to type American South for each one of their collections. So how do we come up with a way to bring these disparate collections together and tag them in a way that can be useful for just interested researchers across
volunteers too, right?
In our case,
Transcribers.
we have volunteers who are looking for material they're interested in to work on across about 100 different institutions and 1,000 different collections. So how can we bring that? How can we make that easier? So I'm going to talk about 3 different examples of these. So this is a description and title of a project that the Indianapolis Public Library is running. which is a photo classification project. And you can see their description is a kind of an explanation of the background of Indianapolis parks, and they talk about photographs, but their description also has a little bit of kind of how-to documentation, getting started as part of their description. So that's kind of weird, right? Now let's contrast that with a project at Western University Library that is in Canada, yeah, which is a list of titles. This is a handwritten library catalog for a private library. This is really interesting for library history and for book history, but unless you are someone who knows that Bishop Isaac Helmuth had one of these, you're never going to likely to find that. The third example is one from Carleton College with a collection of photographs taken in China. And you can see that one of the complicated factors that this has is that half the description is in Chinese. So how can we classify those? How can we use ChatGPT to try to tag them in ways that would make sense to researchers? So we ran an experiment. We started off with creating a controlled vocabulary of tags that mentioned dates, places, and then kinds of thematic parts of the collections. Then we fed ChatGPT the list of tags to use, and then this information that we had, the title of the collection and the description of the collection, and asked it to produce these tags. So
choose the
tags that applied to each one of these. Now we had already tagged these collections. In fact, a trained archivist had tagged these collections already. So we wanted to compare her results with the results that ChatGPT created. So let's take a look at what we came up with. So for the Indianapolis Parks and Rec photo collection, ChatGPT tagged parks, photographs and images at 19th century. 19th century is probably wrong.
I think that's based on the one date that shows up in the about, which is when the park system was created, right?
And I do wonder if we had not told it to pick 3 tags, if maybe it would have dropped 19th century.
That's true.
But the other 2 tags were exactly what the archivist had picked for this collection. For the Bishop Helmuth Library catalog, ChatGPT came up with 19th century, as did the archivist. It also came up with university, whereas the archivist came up with education, but ChatGPT actually came up with book history. And this is actually an improvement. This is better because this is a book history project. For the photographic collection from China, ChatGPT came up with China, 20th century photographs and images. It missed travel, but otherwise, I think this might actually be an improvement. So we were pretty impressed. So let's take a look at the prompt that we used. And I have to say that this is the result of about 3 different iterations on the prompt. So we said, pick 3 tags from the following list. Now, that we presented the list and then said to describe a collection with this title and this description. The initial passes of this generated a lot of tags that were not in the list we provided, right? A lot of hallucinations. So we had to add, please pick tags only from the given list. That was a little better, but still not good enough, right? So we finally had to say, do not give me anything that isn't in the list. And that's when we got results that 90% of the time actually were chosen from the list. There were still a few terms that were actually better. That's the problem.
Yes, it's like we didn't have Vietnam War in our list, and there was at least one collection where that was a really good tag. So
yeah, so so we were pretty impressed by that. Another thing that's interesting, another experiment we did was thinking about the power of large language models to paraphrase existing text. So large language models are really good at paraphrasing. They're good at, say, translating a program from one programming language to a different programming language. But why is that something that would matter for cultural heritage collections? I actually think it is pretty important because anybody who's working with primary sources typically is going to be creating verbatim transcriptions. They're going to be preserving the original spelling, the original punctuation, capitalization of these documents. And so here's another example from this 19th century tobacco diary that Sarah was working with as well. I took this and I ran it through a screen reader, the kind of tool that would be used by someone who is visually impaired. Now imagine listening to these words being read out in a monotone with no pauses at the ends of sentences unless punctuation had been explicitly provided. It's terrible. It's really, really hard to follow. All these clues that we get from context of knowing when a sentence ended, because this is a very terse kind of abbreviated diary, knowing when things would begin, these narration tools just don't pick up on it all. So another challenge, in addition to access for people using screen readers, is full text search. If I were searching for Stony Point, I would not find this page, even though Stony Point is mentioned twice in the dialect spelling Stony Pint, which is probably how the diarist pronounced this. So I would miss this page completely. So there are cases in which paraphrasing and regularization makes sense. This is something that some libraries and archives already do, particularly ones who are working with older text. So this is an example from early modern manuscripts online at the Folger Shakespeare Library. They have a collection of letters that were written from roughly the time of Shakespeare. They're all in early modern English. And so they have transcribed all of this using a diplomatic transcription, which maintains the original spellings, the original punctuation, and the original abbreviations of these documents. So you can see, if you look at the very last line, Blithfield, the 27th of February, well, 27th is in Roman numerals. February has two F's at the beginning of it instead of a capital F. This, you can imagine, would have all the same problems that the farm diary did. What the Folger staff has done is that they have created their own regularized version of this document that makes it easier for modern researchers to access it, the same reasons I was describing before. So if we compare the two, you see the diplomatic transcription, you see the regular transcription. One of the interesting things here is if you look at the third line from the bottom, which I hope by your LPS good means will be prevented. I had no idea that LPS is an abbreviation of lordship, but they've done that, right? The Folger staff have created this regularized transcription to serve modern researchers. What this means is that we can perform an experiment. We can see whether or not large language models can automatically regularize diplomatic transcripts. So we start by feeding the diplomatic transcriptions to ChatGPT, prompting it to regularize the text, and then compare ChatGPT's regularizations against the regularizations that were created by the staff at the Folger Shakespeare Library. So how did it do? So here is the same letter with the diplomatic transcription on the left and the ChatGPT regularized version on the right. If you take a look at if you jump straight down to the bottom line, you can see Blithfield, the 27th of February, 1595. That's bang on, right? It's got the date is changed from Roman numerals. The F in February is modernized. We also have, if you look one up above that, we've got commas where we would expect them to be. Lordship has been expanded. It did a pretty good job. But how does its result compare against the result by the Folger Shakespeare Library staff? And near as I can tell, the only differences were fairly small issues of style. ChatGPT was more likely to break up the kinds of run-on sentences that you find in early modern texts, which I think could be a good thing. And it is less close to the original, but it is just as readable, and in some cases, perhaps even better. It was also more likely to add commas, which, based on my experience with screen readers, I think would actually help a lot. So how did we do this? Here is the prompt that we used. And again, this took quite a bit of iteration to get this right. So we started off and said, You are a librarian who makes primary sources more accessible to the public. So that's the role that Sarah was talking about. I'll give you the text of a letter written in early modern English containing non-standard spelling and punctuation. So that's context. Please create a regularized version of the text, which can be read easily by a modern researcher. That is our output specification. Then I provide the text. We did have to do this a few times because if we eliminated the role, if we just said regularize this text, Right Honorable My Very Good Lord was paraphrased as Dear Lord, which is not something I think anyone in 1595 would write to at least another human.
There was another example that you were here where it changed the location of the letter.
That's right.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
The other thing that changed before we changed this created this prompt, the two letters found by a carrier on the highway to Chester, 2 miles on this side of the town of Nantwich. It did a lot more paraphrasing of that in ways that we did not like. It replaced 2 miles on this side of the town of Nantwich to near the town of Nantwich, which is not really the same. So there were a number of other changes like that.
So those are kind of the experiments we've been running and the things we've been trying. We have a lot more that we'd like to do. We'd love to do things like take a finding aid that's been, as a PDF form or even an old typed one, and have some plugins for ChatGPT read that and produce some derivative formats that are more machine friendly.
EAD XML. We're also very interested in looking at say dirty OCR data or dirty HTR data and using that to come up with, to increase discoverability, frankly.
And we've actually seen some examples of that by other colleagues. Deb Paul at I Did Bio did.
Right, she was taking dirty OCR of specimen labels. So these are natural history specimens, so plants or bugs or things like that. That have collectors' names, the species name, and where they were collected and when they were collected on typewritten index cards that vary in format immensely. And she was able to take the OCR from those index cards, ask ChatGPT to identify the collector and the species, the location, and then got it to produce all of that in structured JSON formats that corresponded with that actually matched the Darwin core specification.
So lots and lots of possibilities. So yeah, we do these types of webinars once a month. Usually they're not at Australia, New Zealand, Asia friendly times, but we record them all and we send them out. So we have one on crowdsourcing coming up in August. We also have a number of ones that I don't have scheduled yet, but that are related to AI and machine learning. So our friend Will Hicks from the University of North Texas is going to come do a talk about Whisper AI and audio resources. He did a project that's really fascinating and it worked really well. We have an intern this summer who's been helping us with a lot of these research questions. So she's going to come and talk about what she's learned and found in the course of doing a lot of these experiments. And I'm going to do a talk on this chatbot that I'm building sometime in the fall. So watch the URL at the bottom and yeah, come join us again.
So we're going to stop sharing. That is the end of our formal presentation. So if you have any questions or comments, you can type them into the chat. If
you can also
unmute yourself. It's a small enough group that you can unmute yourself and just say hello and ask things away.
Hi, Sarah and Ben. It's Mary here from State Library of Western Australia. I run the volunteer program, so not a librarian. The first half of your presentation, really fascinating. I'm just starting to delve into the world of ChatGPT and have been really impressed with the results. So I'm really appreciative of those tips and prompts because it's starting to give me a glimpse of what else it can do. So I'll certainly be encouraging the team to view the recording of this. Really, really useful. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
And if you have people who are have less of a background than you do in this, Sarah's presentation last month was more of an introduction to how large language models work and potential applications of,
and also kind of wrapping your head around what's going on under the covers just enough that it doesn't surprise you, right? There's a lot of surprises still when we start interacting with this, but if you have a little bit of a model in your head, then you'll be like, yeah, I understand where that came from. Let me tweak how I'm thinking about this to suit the technology a little bit better, right?
And a recording of that talk is on our YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments?
Had lots this morning, 11 hours ago. Come on, guys.
Hi, just a quick question. Thank you. That's been it's been quite illuminating for me just to understand the potential for using ChatGPT in this context. Does it also do translation?
Yes, but you have to be careful because remember, it's paraphrasing and it's paraphrasing very plausibly.
Right. The goal of these models is to produce the next word in a string of words, and that next word needs to be statistically reasonable, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's right.
One of the cautionary tales, I think, was there's a site for web developers called Hacker News, and I'm very interested in, obviously with what we do, we're very interested in different kinds of scripts. Someone posted a Mongolian presidential candidate's webpage that they thought was fascinating because they were using a traditional Mongolian alphabet that's written top to bottom. So scrolling through the web page, you had to scroll left to right instead of scrolling top to bottom. And someone posted an analysis saying, if I try to feed this into Google Translate, it can't do it. It just produces gibberish. But if I ask ChatGPT to translate this paragraph that I cut and pasted, it does a great job. And it explained, there was this paragraph all about this 80-year plan that Mongolia was going through for infrastructure development. Another commenter came in and said, wait a minute, I tried the same thing, and here's the translation it gave me. And it was all about this 80-kilometer long highway that was being built, right? And all of the answers were just made up. They were just, and so you really do have to double check it. I definitely would not trust it with a minority language, a language that did not have a lot of data behind it. And I wouldn't trust it with a language that I didn't know well enough to check a little bit.
There are some graphs out there. So the models have been trained on multiple languages. The vast majority of the training data is English, but there's some graphs out there that show kind of representation of the different languages. Like I think Spanish is actually really, really good, but others go down. I saw a presentation in the last week or so by some people who do AI for the National Library of Norway, and they were doing some work. I think this is Whisper AI, so this is audio recognition, like Sami, which is like their third or fourth most popular, but therefore but not very popular language in Norway, and they had to provide they had to provide training data in order to be able to do this. Now, it didn't take a ton, but it wasn't in the models already.
There's a question from Elizabeth. So apologies if you missed this, but can the program read back to users with visual impairment? So text to audio is kind of a different problem from audio to text or text to text. So ChatGPT that we've worked with and demonstrated today is really just text to text.
You type in text, you get text out.
Right. That said, we do think that there are powerful opportunities for it to be used as an intermediary by people who are using screen readers. I showed the example of regularizing primary source text, but I can definitely imagine someone who's using a screen reader asking it to summarize a web page or summarize different parts of paragraphs so that they did not have to wade through all the text on a page and could just hone in on the material that interested them. Any other questions or comments? Okay, well, thank you all for coming. As Sarah mentioned, there'll be email going out with probably tomorrow with a recording.
Yeah, tomorrow or Monday.
Yes. Yeah.
If you do experiments, if you try things, let us know. We're curious to see what works, what doesn't, what problems you're trying to solve. That's a lot of why we're kind of all in here, is we're like, how is this going to change things? Where can we help libraries and archives using this technology? What's going to happen, right? And it can be super scary, but it's also exciting.
Did you have any insights from the earlier group that you ran via Europe that could be useful to share here?
So the earlier group was, I would actually say, majority American and North American, with some Europeans.
Right. I would say that the most interesting things that came out of that were that there were a lot of people who were interested in where the conversations are happening. Are there groups of people who are, researching AI for archives?
I'm going to drop a URL in the chat.
Yeah. Because there were a lot of people who said, yeah, we're interested in experimenting with this too. We're interested in seeing what we can do with raw, dirty OCR. We're interested in seeing what we could do with legacy metadata that needs cleaning up. And there seemed to be a real interest into kind of pooling these resources into having discussion forums or some sort of way of sharing the experiments that were all kind of independently running. And then Sarah's added a link to.
Yeah, this is a group called AI for LAM that has been having these conversations actually for about 3 or 4 years before COVID even. It definitely skews kind of technical implementer side rather than sort of how do we practically apply this. I mean, it has pieces of that as well, but I think that's a good place to go if you want to learn more and see what other conversations are happening.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, everyone, and we hope you all have good days.